My name is Kelsey Harris. I'm 35 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. My morning doesn't start with coffee, although the latte with oat milk that I pick up at Hard Coffee Roasters is still firmly on my schedule, but with waking up in the bright bedroom of my loft in the Pearl District. There, behind the panoramic windows, the gray Oregon sky lies like smooth glass on the roof of a neighboring house, and the quiet city seems to be still asleep, sending the remnants of fog towards Columbia. I live alone. And although many people equate loneliness with emptiness, for me it is an order. Familiar, like an alarm clock ringing, like the rustle of the pages of a financial report, like my reflected profile in the elevator mirror on the way to the office on the 14th floor. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I am the chief financial officer of a company whose name means little to those who are far from the investment market, but in the world of numbers and capital, it sounds weighty. My days are arranged in an exact chronology, like lines in Excel, and I know how much I will earn this month, in 6 months, and in 3 years, if there is no apocalypse or takeover. I don't have to check the bill before paying with a card. I own 2 apartments, one here, in the heart of the city, and the other in Lake Oswego, in a green, almost secluded suburb that smells of pine trees and silence. I bought this apartment first when I got a position as an analyst and, for the first time in my life, I felt financially independent. There, outside the windows overlooking the lake, I used to celebrate my small victories with a glass of wine, a new book, and a rare nap until noon. If someone were to describe my life from the outside, they would most likely use the word stable. But stability is an insidious concept. Cracks can hide in it, barely visible to the eye, until it's too late. Melissa has always been my crack. My younger sister is the exact opposite of me. It was as if she had come out of another story, was born on another planet, where different laws of gravity apply. While I was working on financial models, she flew around the world, posting Instagram photos from Cabo, Paris, Seoul. I tried myself as a wellness coach, blogger, photographer, animator. Her dreams were bright, noisy, and short-lived. It caught fire quickly, and burned out just as quickly. But no matter what she did, her parents always supported her. "She's just looking for herself," Mom said. "You always have everything under control, Kels." I listened, nodding, clenching my teeth. I didn't need to be controlled, I was that control. Someone had to be an adult in this family. Melissa has been dating Grayson for many years, the guy who used to come to our house with an awkward smile and a tattoo of a bird on his collarbone. He's not bad. Quiet, a little detached, as if always thinking 2 steps to the side. I can't say that I know him, just as I can't say that he really knows my sister. But maybe it's none of my business. When they announced the wedding, Mom was thrilled. She began to organize everything with such zeal, as if it were her personal victory. I already knew then that it would not be cheap for me. And she was right. The $30,000 that I handed over to them back in the spring were supposed to cover the bulk of the expenses. I didn't complain. I can share. I'm used to sharing. Especially with Melissa. But what happened that evening, when we all gathered at my parents' house on Northwest Hills Road, destroyed everything that I, perhaps naively, believed in. The evening began quietly. There was a fireplace in the living room, although the weather did not require a fire. Mom served baked trout with lemon sauce, and Dad talked about his last trip to the golf club. Melissa and Grayson were sitting next to each other on the couch, holding hands like teenagers. But there was something in their gazes tension, too, long pauses, half smiles that meant nothing. "Kels, we wanted to talk to you about something," Melissa began when Mom served dessert, her signature pumpkin pie with cinnamon. I already knew what was coming. It wasn't a hunch, it was knowledge. It was as if a light bulb had turned on in my body, warning me of an impending malfunction. "Mom, Dad, Grayson, and I have been thinking," she continued, "and we want to ask you for a wedding present." I thought $30,000 was already a good gift, I said, trying to smile, but my voice sounded hoarse. Melissa looked at me with the look of a hurt child. "You're successful, you have 2 apartments." She said it as easily as if she were talking about 2 pairs of shoes. "And the one in Lake Oswego is just the perfect place for us. We've been living there for 3 years now, and that's it. It feels like home." I put my fork on the edge of my plate. "Do you want me to give you an apartment?" I asked, making sure I understood correctly. "Well, yeah, it would be a gesture of love," Mom added, as if to suggest that I had just misread the script. I didn't answer right away. The air in the dining room became as thick as syrup, and it seemed to me that even the candles on the table were flickering uncertainly. Then I stood up. "No," I said. "No, Melissa. I've already given you everything I can. This apartment is mine. I've been working for her for years." "You're selfish," she said, and there was no longer any pleading in her voice. "Only the poison. You don't have anyone. No husband, no children. You're getting old alone, and you just have nothing to do but save for apartments." I looked at her and couldn't believe it. Not in words, but in the fact that they were said seriously. I looked at my parents. My father looked away. Mom said softly, "Melissa is right. You could have been a little generous." At that moment, I realized that something inside me, something very old, quiet, and stubborn, had cracked. I picked up my purse, glanced at my watch, and left without turning around. At the entrance, I couldn't find the keys in my pocket for a long time. My hands were shaking. There was a lump in my throat. I got into the car and turned on the radio, but instead of the sound, I heard something inside me break soundlessly and fold back up, in a different way. I didn't know then that this evening would be a turning point. But I knew for sure there would be no turning back. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The barely discernible light of the street filtered through the cracks of the blinds, and the room seemed hazy, like in movies where the heroine wakes up after an important dream. But in fact, dreams did not come to me that night. There was too much noise in my head. I lay on my back for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling, then got up and brewed strong black tea, but even the bitterness of the drink could not drive away the viscous feeling of betrayal stuck under my ribs. My family, the ones I considered my mainstay, looked at me yesterday as if I were a stranger. And not because I refused to give them my property, but because I dared to say no. I dressed without much enthusiasm, dark jeans, a wool cardigan, and pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail. In the mirror, I looked older and more tired than usual. But there was some kind of new power in it, not bright, but hidden, like roots under the ground. After leaving the city center, I headed south to Lake Oswego, where the lake and the freshness of the fir bark usually smelled in the morning. I drove in silence, without a radio. The road seemed painfully familiar, and perhaps it was this sense of recognition that made the upcoming encounter especially difficult. When I turned onto Briarwood Lane, I stopped at the entrance as usual. The apartment looked the same as always, a white facade, a neat balcony with pots in which I used to plant geraniums myself. The only thing different was the feeling of cold coming from the doors, as if the house itself had turned away from me. I knocked once. Silence. Then again. There was a rustle outside the door, soft, almost inaudible, but quite distinguishable. Someone was inside. I recognized the gate. Melissa. I knocked louder. "Melissa, I know you're home. Open." There was no response. Only a dull movement and silence again. My heart began to beat faster. I reached into my coat pocket and felt for my keys. I put one in the keyhole, but it wouldn't turn. I held the key closer to my eyes, as if that would explain something. I tried again, but in vain. The mechanism wouldn't budge, as if it wasn't my key at all. Not my door. Not my house. I took a step back. Impossible. I own this place. This apartment is registered in my name. I pay taxes and insurance for it. I repaired the wiring here. I installed kitchen cabinets. I bought this house with my own money, earned by sleepless nights. And now I couldn't get inside. My fingers were numb, but I took out my phone anyway and dialed Melissa's number. She answered on the third ring. "Hi, Kels." Her voice was flat, almost bored. "Is something wrong? Did you change the locks?" I tried to speak calmly, but a storm was already building inside. "Melissa, did you change the locks in my apartment?" There was a short pause, then a light chuckle. "Well, technically, our apartment. Grayson and I live here, right? This is the 3rd year. This is our home, Kelsey." "No," I whispered. "This is my house. An apartment designed for me. Bought by me. With my money." "Come on," she snapped. "You don't live here anyway. You have an apartment in the center. We've already settled in, redone some things, invested, by the way. It's not just a place anymore, it's our start. And we both know that you won't sue your own sister. It's ugly. Family, after all." I was silent for a long time, peering at the door, as if I could see through it the face of the man I used to watch cartoons with on Sundays. The one who once ran to me with a torn notebook, crying because of the two. "Melissa, what have you done to yourself? Is that your final word?" I finally said. The answer was as cold as ice. "Don't ruin everything. Better just let go." I hung up the phone. Not knowing how I got back to the car, I don't remember the way back. I drove until my hands started shaking with rage. Everything inside me screamed, unfair, unfair, dirty. I've just been kicked out of my own house. They didn't ask, they didn't beg, they didn't explain. They just threw him out like an unwanted piece from a chessboard. That evening, sitting in the dark of my apartment with a glass of red, I saw the post. Melissa posted a photo with the caption, "Important announcement. Grayson, my parents, and I have decided not to invite Kelsey to our wedding. Family is not only about blood, but also about support. And if you're not with us, then you're against us." Comments were already gathering under the photo. Someone from distant relatives put hearts. Someone asked what happened. I didn't comment. She didn't answer the phone. The phone was literally vibrating with incoming messages. Uncles, aunts, cousins, everyone wanted to know what was going on. But I didn't say anything. For the first time in a very long time, I stopped feeling obligated to explain myself. There was no need to be the same Kelsey who would always come to the rescue, pay, sacrifice, give in. Something in me was broken, not painfully, not loudly, but forever. I was no longer the silent cushion of someone else's ambitions. I was a woman who was deceived. But I was still a woman, and I wasn't going to give up what was rightfully mine without a fight. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of rain drumming on the windowpane. In my dream, I dreamed of entering that very apartment in Lake Oswego not as a guest, not as an exile, but as a hostess. With a key that fits the lock. And with a truth that no longer needed to be hidden. The wedding day was coming, and with every passing hour it felt not like a holiday, but like an hour of reckoning. A few days before, I had sketched out a simple but precise plan late at night at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the cold light of a lamp above my head. It wasn't motivated by revenge, no. It was a return to myself, an attempt to restore the violated boundaries. My boundaries. My right. I found the number of Jim, the locksmith, whom I once called on a very ordinary Saturday when I slammed the door of a city apartment with the keys inside. He arrived in 15 minutes, unlocked the door, chatted about the weather, and even left a business card with a note: "If you get stuck, call." Then I put his card in a drawer with papers and forgot. Now she's back in my arms, as if she's been waiting in the wings. Jim answered the call cheerfully, and when I explained the situation briefly, without details, He simply said, "No problem. Saturday morning is free. I'll be there at 9 sharp." I also rented a small room in West River Storage, a neat concrete hangar on the outskirts of the city with a video surveillance system and an electronic access code. I paid the rent for 3 months in advance, indicated Melissa's last name so that there would be no questions upon receipt. After that, I found a company of movers, silent guys who don't ask unnecessary questions, just an address and a list of tasks. And now it's morning. I woke up at 6, not because of an alarm clock, but because my body knew it was an important day. The sky was overcast, and there was a thin film of morning mist on the streets, like a curtain before a play. I drank coffee by the window, watching Portland wake up, and felt a strange, almost solemn calm rising inside me. At 8:30, I was already standing outside the apartment in Lake Oswego. The cars in the parking lot were unfamiliar. A gray Subaru off-road vehicle, an old Honda Civic. Melissa and Grayson's cars were missing. They were at the training camp, preparing for the wedding, for photo shoots, for champagne and toasts. It was my window. Jim arrived, as promised, at 9 o'clock sharp. With a heavy bag of tools and a smile, as if we had met yesterday. He glanced at the door. "You were excommunicated for a long time, weren't you?" "You could say that," I replied and nodded. He didn't ask too many questions. In 15 minutes, I got rid of the lock, inserted a new, reliable one. He handed me the keys, as if he were handing me something more than metal and screws. "Everything is ready. No one else will enter here without your permission." "Thanks, Jim." I paid in cash and walked him to his car. Then she returned to the apartment. When the door slammed behind me, I stopped in the hallway and took a deep breath. The air here was foreign. It smelled of vanilla candles, cheap air freshener, and some sweet scent of Melissa's perfume. I went into the living room and stopped. The apartment was unrecognizable. My neutral-toned walls were repainted bright blue, the furniture was replaced with strange pseudo-bohemian sofas, and the curtains were replaced with burgundy veils. My paintings have disappeared from the walls, and instead there are framed posters with inscriptions like "Love lives here" and "Good vibes only." It was like a temporary house, where everything was ostentatious, but nothing was real. I walked through the rooms. There was a blender in the kitchen, which I definitely hadn't bought. There are motivational bestsellers on the shelf, and not a single name that I recognize. In the bedroom, her dress is on the door, his shirts are on hangers, a strange bedspread with bright patterns on my bed. There were even photos of the two of them laughing against the background of the lake, hugging against the background of the autumn forest, at a picnic. My apartment became a stage for someone else's life, as if I wasn't even there. I sat on the edge of the bed and just stared at one point for a while. Then she stood up, exhaled, and started. I took out the old boxes from the closet that were kept in the pantry. Methodically, she began to put their things together, neatly, by category. Clothes first. Then the equipment, laptops, speakers, chargers. Books, jewelry, cosmetics. Everything that bore the imprint of their presence went into the boxes. Not with malice, no. With businesslike determination. It wasn't a rout. It was the restoration of order. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there were 22 boxes lined up in the hallway. The movers arrived on time, as agreed. 2 broad-shouldered guys in gray uniforms, both wearing headphones, with short nods. I handed them the list and the address of the warehouse. Everything was prepared in advance. I watched the boxes disappear from the apartment one by one. At the last moment, I handed over one piece of paper, the code from the vault, written with a marker on a white sticker. When the door slammed shut behind the last loader, the apartment became empty and quiet. Only the blue walls reminded of the capture. I walked around the rooms. Now they seemed strangely large, strangely empty. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, I felt that space was returning to me. It's not completely finished yet, but it's already starting. Back at home in Portland, I took a shower, put on a soft robe, and sat down at my laptop. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. The banquet was probably already in full swing. The guests were laughing, champagne was pouring, camera flashes were flashing. I opened my phone and texted Melissa. Congratulations on the wedding. I hope the day was magical. Your gift is in the West River storage. I've rented a room for you. The access code is 9013. All your things are neatly packed. As for the apartment, I changed the locks. Now she's mine again. I think it's time for you to find a new place to live. As adults. This is the only wedding gift that you really deserve. I put the phone down without sending it. I waited a little longer. I poured a glass of white wine and sank into the tub, filling it with lavender foam. When the water reached my chin, I picked up the phone again, pressed send, and put it face down. The first call came in a minute and a half. Then the second one. Third. Messages poured in one after another, from Melissa, from Grayson, from Mom, from Dad. Some were insulting, others were full of pleading, and others were openly threatening. But I didn't answer any of them. I lay in the hot water, feeling the tension slowly go away. Not a single emotion in their words could give me back the part of myself they were trying to take away. I didn't win. I just got mine back. The next morning, I woke up not out of habit and not from internal anxiety, as has happened in recent days, but simply because I had enough sleep. A simple, rare, human sleep, without dreams, without lumps in the throat, without heaviness on the chest. The room was filled with morning light, not yet harsh, diffused through thick curtains, and the air seemed clean, almost sterile, as after a severe thunderstorm. In this silence, broken only by the rumble of the coffee machine, I felt like myself for the first time in a long time, without responsibilities, without expectations, without someone's voices in my head. I didn't check my phone. He was lying on the bedside table like a silent volcano, full of unanswered messages, calls, and accusations. I knew there was a storm. But I didn't want to rush to its epicenter. Instead, I made tea, opened my laptop, and, putting my hands on the keyboard, just started typing. I didn't write in a hurry. She wasn't angry. My text was not a manifesto or a confession, it was a chronology of events. Dry, crisp, and unadorned. I wrote that 3 years ago I allowed my sister and her boyfriend at the time to live in my apartment in Lake Oswego for free. That I paid most of the expenses for their wedding without demanding anything in return. That when I refused to give them an apartment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, they excluded me from the list of those invited to the celebration, changed the locks on my property and said that now it was their home. I wrote that I had to regain access, move their belongings to a storage room and reclose the borders that I should have guarded from the very beginning. Not a single insult. Not a single emotion. Just the facts. When I clicked publish, my chest was empty. Not alarmingly empty, but as if I had exhaled a long, exhausted breath. Everything that should have been said has now been said. Not in a scream, not in a quarrel, but in the text. In a voice that finally sounded. The first response appeared in a couple of minutes. My childhood friend, whom I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, wrote, "I always knew you were strong, but this is something. I'm proud of you." Then there were comments from colleagues, distant relatives, and former classmates who used to come to our summer barbecues. People expressed their support. It was said that Melissa's behavior shocked them. Someone recalled how she was always able to manipulate, hiding it behind a smile. Others just wrote, "You did the right thing." The post began to disperse. With each update of the page, the number of responses increased. I didn't expect such a reaction. I was sure that everyone, as usual, would side with Melissa Jr., the gentle, vulnerable one. That they would consider me a tough, cold careerist who didn't want to share. But no. This time, they saw the situation differently. They saw me. And that was new. I still hadn't opened the messenger, but at some point the phone started vibrating again. A group chat with her parents and Melissa came to life. How could you put all this on the internet? Mom wrote. You shamed your sister on her happiest day, her father echoed. You ruined our wedding, came a message from Melissa. All three of them were saying the same thing, only in different words. In their eyes, I was not a deceived daughter and sister, but a destroyer of a worldview in which I was a silent background, a comfortable shadow. I didn't answer. I read, absorbed this stream of disappointment, indignation, accusations, and remained silent. It's amazing how sometimes silence speaks louder than words. 2 days have passed. The tone of the messages began to change. Where there had been reproaches before, now there was a plea. Please, let's discuss everything calmly, Mom wrote. We must remain a family, my father insisted. Melissa alternated between blaming, apologizing, and blaming again. Her words were bouncing between you ruined everything and I just didn't know you'd react like that. I watched, but I didn't interfere. My silence was not an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation. For years, I was the one who smoothed the corners, accepted the terms of the game, as long as everything remained peaceful. I hosted family dinners, bought gifts for two, and paid for vacations when I didn't have enough money. And all this was considered the norm, because I am the eldest, successful, and strong. But at some point, even the strong get tired of being silent. I felt no anger, no more than a patient feels anger at a scalpel. It was necessary to finally heal. In the evening, I opened the post again. I read it all over again, word by word. And I realized that I don't regret it. None of them. It wasn't a scream, not a vindictive exposure. It was my voice. For the first time, not in a whisper, not in irony, not in a concession. Fully, clearly, directly. In a world where those who are louder are so often heard, I needed to remind myself, I can talk too. And now I've done it. It's been a few months since I got my apartment back, and with it, it seemed to me at the time, something more, a sense of control, self-respect, and the inner support that had been taken away from me for years. Life flowed differently, in a different dimension. There was less shouting, less expectation, less emotional noise. My apartment in Lake Oswego, which survived the invasion and betrayal, found new tenants, a young couple who paid on time, did not ask for gestures of love in the form of ownership and respected personal space. I did a general cleaning, repainted the walls back to a soft milky shade, replaced the curtains, and with every movement of a brush or rag, it was as if I was cleaning not only the house, but also my own memory. The job has also changed. Or maybe I've changed. Previously, the office seemed to me like an arena where you had to fight for every inch of recognition, for every step up. Now that I've stopped trying to prove my worth to anyone but myself, everything has become surprisingly easy. My cost optimization strategy brought record savings to the department, and at the end of the quarter I was offered a new position, Vice President of Finance. I wasn't just happy, I was calm. The recognition came without a struggle. I no longer needed approval, and so it came. But that wasn't the main discovery at all. The real change happened in the part of my life that I had almost written off, in my personal one. I met Ethan at a meeting of the local hiking club. My friend dragged me there, assuring me that some fresh air and the ground under your feet would do you good. It was cloudy that morning, drizzling, and the forest smelled of spruce, moss, and green leaves. I was walking in a group, a little apart, when he caught up with me. He was tall, wearing a windbreaker the color of wet asphalt, with a beard and warm eyes. "You're the first one to wear the right shoes," he said by way of greeting, pointing to my sturdy trekking boots. "Everyone else looks like they're going to shoot a yogurt commercial." I laughed. And so did he. The conversation started by itself. He turned out to be an environmental engineer who worked on restoring the ecosystem in the floodplain of the Willamette River. We talked about the weather, nature, and our favorite books. There was no play, there were no hints, there was not a shadow of what I so used to consider male coquetry. It felt like I was talking to a person who was listening. For real. We started seeing each other more often. It's not violent, no fireworks, no dozens of messages a day. But in each of our dates there was something reliable, like an old tree, under the shade of which you just want to stand and breathe. He didn't try to invade my world. He stood delicately at its border until I invited him in. He invited me to his family for Christmas. I hesitated. Holidays have always been a time of tension, expectation, and theater for me. But he just said, "If you don't want to, we won't go. But they'll be happy to meet you." And I went. His parents lived in a small house in a suburb of Vancouver, Washington. Warm, smelling of cinnamon and freshly baked bread. His mother, a short woman with thick gray hair, hugged me as if she had known me all her life. My father poured wine, peppered jokes, and laughed all the time. It was noisy, cozy, and a little chaotic at the table, but there was no heaviness, no traps, and no expectation that you would give in if you loved. For the first time in many years, I felt like a part of something warm, truly alive. No strings attached. Without manipulation. We drove in silence on the way back. I looked out the window, watching the streets of the city fill with lights again, as the Christmas trees light up in the windows, and I felt something new in myself. Quiet, almost imperceptible, but important. Not just gratitude. Something like faith. The belief that you can still build intimacy without giving up on yourself. A couple of weeks after the holidays, I received a letter. It came in an ordinary postal envelope, with an address written in his father's handwriting. Inside was an invitation to a Thanksgiving dinner. Clear, printed, formal. But at the bottom, in a white field under the lines of text, there was a postscript in Mom's handwriting. "Melissa and Grayson are not coming. We miss you." I held this piece of paper in my hands for a long time, as if warmth radiated from it. I read one line over and over again. It wasn't because she didn't understand the meaning, but because I was trying to feel, is this an invitation or a test? Is this an attempt to restore a relationship or just a desire to relieve yourself of guilt? I told Ethan. He listened, as always, without interrupting. And in the end, he just asked, "Do you want to go?" I didn't know what to say right away. I'd been thinking for a few days. I remembered the resentment, the anger I felt, standing alone in front of the closed door of my own house. I remembered how painful it was to hear from my mother, "You could have been more generous." How my father looked away when Melissa humiliated me. All this was still living inside, like an unhealed wound. Still, I hesitated. Because behind the pain, there were always memories of something good, fried marshmallows in the backyard, how Melissa and I built a pillow house as children, how my mother sang in the kitchen. Not everything in our family was a lie. It's just that the lie has become too big over time, crowding out everything else. In the end, I wrote a short letter. Smooth. Quiet. No complaints. Thanks for the invitation. I'm not ready for a family dinner yet. I hope you understand. I didn't get an answer. No letter, no phone call. Just silence. But there was no threat in that silence. There wasn't even a grudge. It was just silence, and in it, oddly enough, I felt freedom. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to justify myself. You didn't have to agree to be good. I chose what suited me. I chose myself. Life went on as usual, like a river after a flood, when the water finally returns to its course. Only now I was no longer standing on the shore. I followed it. Firmly, calmly, step by step, towards the new shore. Spring comes slowly in Portland. It doesn't burst in with sudden warmth, as in the South, or excite with a riot of color, as in California gardens. Here it stretches, sprouts through rain and gray, opens timidly, as if afraid to be premature. The young leaves are barely noticeably shaking in the wind, as if they are not sure whether they should stay. I've always loved this time of year, not for the light, but for the quiet change, for the feeling that something inside is starting to thaw. One of these days, when I returned home after an evening jog and was just about to turn on the music, I heard the vibration of the phone on the windowsill. There was a message from Melissa. I recognized her name right away. It was still listed in my contacts, although every time the screen lit up with that word, something inside me seemed to shrink, waiting for pain. The message was short. Without embellishment, without aggression, without irony, I'm pregnant. The birth is in August. I thought you should know. You're going to be an aunt. I've read it twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't know how to feel. It's as if my emotions are not a ready-made cocktail, but a set of incompatible ingredients, each of which is fighting for a place inside me. Joy. Sadness. A shadow of envy that I couldn't shake off. Regret. Questions. Fear. I stared at the screen, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't know how to respond. I went into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, drank it in one gulp, returned, looked at the screen and wrote, "Congratulations. I hope everything will be fine." Then she turned off her phone and left it in the bedroom. I didn't want to think anymore. I didn't want to go back to a place where there was so much understatement, pain, and disappointment. My life went on as usual. I continued to work, develop projects, and travel to Lake Oswego, where the apartment residents paid their rent on time and never sent strange messages. Ethan and I often walked along the banks of the Willamette, sometimes in complete silence, and this silence was not awkward. It was calm, like the surface of water on which the rays of the setting sun fall. We didn't discuss my family. He knew when not to ask. He was attentive, considerate, and didn't require explanations. With him, for the first time, I felt that I could be whole, not in spite of my past pain, but with it. Sometimes my parents wrote. Sometimes they were short messages, like, "How are you?" Or "Maybe we can meet for coffee." Sometimes there were letters in which attempts at apologies were drowned under layers of insecurity. They weren't rude, but they still seemed to have a hard time accepting my distance. They didn't understand why I wasn't coming back. Why don't I join back into the family circle, as if everything that happened can be washed away by time, like footprints on a fogged mirror? Melissa also wrote sometimes. Her messages were different. On some days, she sent ultrasound photos, captions with hearts, and comments like "You could come to the baby's first shopping trip." In others, reproaches: "You could have been there for me. You choose to be alone." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't feel it. It was because she remembered all too well how easy it was for her to trample on my vulnerability when I was standing on my own doorstep, knocking on a closed door. But to be honest, there were days when I looked at these messages and thought, what if everything could have been different? What if I had shown more patience, more gentleness, more generosity? And then I remembered how many years I had lived this way, for the sake of peace, for the sake of harmony, for the sake of family. And how many times it turned into betrayal, used by trust in words that cannot be forgotten. I was no longer dependent on their approval. I didn't need my mom to tell me she was proud of me anymore. I no longer needed Dad's nods of approval. I no longer expected Melissa to love me, which was always conditional. If you do, if you give in, if you give. I built my life according to different laws. Where respect doesn't have to be begged. Where love is not a request, but a choice. Where I could be myself, with flaws, with boundaries, with dignity. Spring dragged on slowly. Ethan and I started planning a little trip along the coast. I joined a yoga club and took cooking classes on the weekends. Not because you need to, but because you want to. I was no longer afraid to be alone, because I realized that loneliness is not the absence of people around, but the lack of connection with myself. And now I had that connection. Strong, warm, reliable. One day in April, when the air was already filled with the smell of apple blossoms, I was sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and watching the evening sun dissolve into the roofs. Ethan was reading nearby. I turned to him and said, "You know, I've been thinking, maybe I should meet my parents. Not to forgive or forget everything, but just to say, I'm alive. I am. And I'm different." He looked at me, put down the book, and nodded. "If you're ready for this, I'll be there." I didn't know when it would happen. Maybe in the summer. Maybe in the fall. Maybe never. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the past was controlling my present. It was there, behind my shoulders. It didn't disappear, it didn't fade away, but it no longer dictated how I should live. I allowed myself to let go. Not because there was no pain, but because the time has come to part with something that has not served me for a long time. I chose myself. And it became the most important choice of my life.